So we have so many choices when you're in the grocery store. There's 30 feet long and about 6, 7 shelves high. So there's lots of beer to choose from. So tonight I want to give you a little information about how beer is made, and then we'll get into the styles of beer and how you can kind of weave your way through the world of beer. So beer is traditionally made with 4 ingredients, pretty basic. Water, which makes up most of beer. Malt, malted barley, so it is wheat that is pretty much cooked. And all different malt is cooked to different levels. Pale malt is cooked to be nice and light and pale. And it goes all the way up to chocolate malt. Some of the malt, they burn the malt. Black malt is pretty much burnt. It gives a real bitter taste, so that has a lot to do with the flavor of the beer. So that's the second ingredient. Third ingredient is hops. Hops brings beer the bittering, which will balance out the sweetness that the malt creates, as well as aroma. So a lot of hops are just there for the smell, not so much for the taste. Fourth ingredient is our magic ingredient, which is yeast. Yeast turns the sugar and produces alcohol and natural carbonation. So when we brew, the first process is taking the malt and putting it through the mill, so it becomes grist. It's just cracked. It's not really completely smashed into powder. It's just barely cracked in half or so. Mixed with hot water. This is the mash. We call it mashing in. And it's like a big pot of oatmeal. And it smells really sweet. It smells good. There's a big paddle. Kind of turns around in the big mash tun. Keeps it moving. Sits in there for about an hour or so. Then it is transferred to the lauter tun, where it is drained off. All that sweet liquid, which is called wort, is drained off to another tank. This is the kettle. Goes through a boil, and this is where the hops are added. So different hops are added at different times during the boil, depending on whether they're aromatic hops or bittering hops. From here, it goes down to the whirlpool, where it just spins and it pretty much just turns the liquid, and a lot of the hop particles and whatnot fall out. So it almost acts like a filter when it goes through the whirlpool. The liquid is cooled in a heat exchanger, and then it's put into the fermenter. At this point, the yeast is pitched, and magic happens. 4 to 6 days for ale, 4 to 6 weeks for lager. So this is where we get into the styles of beer and the different types. All beer is either ale or lager. Ales are your amber ale, your IPA, your pale ale, stouts, porters. Lagers are pilsners, bocks, Oktoberfest. An ale is brewed warmer, so the yeast is more active. It's quicker. It eats the sugar, creates alcohol. It is top fermented, and it moves quick. You can brew a whole batch of beer from beginning to end in the bottle within 6-7 days. With lager, it's slow. It's colder temperature, so the yeast just acts slower, takes longer. A lot of times it creates more of a crisp, clean flavor in the beer. So session lager, we're all familiar with session, is a lager. It is a Pilsner style. Today we're going to be sampling India Pale Ale. If you could just pour yourself a couple ounces and pass the bottle down, we can all try. India Pale Ale is a style of beer. Comes from way back in the day when England was colonizing India. They would send barrels of beer over on the ships for the troops, and it would always spoil. They could never keep, the beer wouldn't last very long. So brewers at the time knew that hops act as a preservative and would enable the beer to make the long journey. So they would add a whole bunch extra hops in the beer, and because it was so hoppy and kind of bitter, they would add a lot of malt as well to kind of balance that out. And so a typical IPA today, the style kind of stuck. People liked it. They didn't care that it was just to make the journey. It kind of caught on. And so a typical India Pale Ale is a little bit heavier body than a lighter beer would be. It's got a little bit of malt going on, and it's hopped to, it's more of an aggressive hop. This is definitely not an imperial IPA, which pretty much means a double. It would be double hopped. And so India Pale Ale is right now the fastest growing category in the craft beer segment. It is not the most popular one yet, but it is kind of quickly going in that direction. And our IPA is a very balanced IPA. A lot of IPAs are extremely hoppy, and therefore a lot of malt is added, and it amps up the beer, and it also amps up the alcohol level. So when you get into your IPAs, you're going to have more body and more alcohol. And I'm going to take some questions and answers because I'd really like to answer any questions that you may have. I don't know, you all probably weren't here for my speech last week, but any questions from then or for tonight, anything about beer or...
Yeah, do you guys use different kinds of hops for different beers, or is it the same kind of hops?
We do use different kinds of hops. We use, most of our hops are pellets. They're hop pellets. They make for extremely consistent hops. So the hops are dried in big drying houses, and then they're ground up and then pressed into pellets. And so pellets stay. You can keep them a lot longer. We get them in vacuum packed bags. And we use Mountain Hood, a lot of local, mostly Northwest hops, Mountain Hood, Cascade, Chinook.
What would a hops catalog look like?
It is, I've seen one. Hop Union is our friends out in Yakima. They're kind of like a co-op of hop farmers. So we're going to be walking the hop fields in a couple weeks. So at harvest time, they kind of decide which looks the best. And those hops will usually be offered to breweries for the next season, like after the new year, because they're going to be going through their process. But it's just it's like a booklet of a couple pieces of paper that just have all these different names, Zeus, Rainier. It's kind of exotic and fun.
I've been told that nobody can claim they invented beer because it probably was invented in different places.
That I think.
Something I noticed that everybody that is like from a particular country, they like to say that their beer is the best. And I want to get your take on that.
That's very true, and we are very privileged to live in one of the best places on earth for beer, because we have just a unique style all of our own. I mean, Germany has very traditional laws that they follow, the Reinheitsgebot, and in Belgium they have their own, and a lot of them are really old and true, tried and true styles. But in the Northwest, we're constantly coming up. Now there's a new CDA. It's Cascadia Dark Ale. It's like a new style of beer that just kind of came about. So, yeah.
What's the difference between an IPA and a wheat beer?
A wheat beer, Hefeweizen means half wheat. So it's half malt and half wheat. And so the wheat it's generally an unfiltered beer. It's a lighter alcohol beer, served sometimes with a lemon. And an IPA is opposite end of the spectrum. There's not very many hops in a wheat beer as opposed to an IPA. And IPAs are typically filtered, so they're clear. A lot of Hefeweizens or wheat beers are cloudy.
Are there some other examples of really hoppy beers other than IPA?
You have your
it's kind of the hoppiest beer?
Imperial IPA. Imperial usually means double. Like a double IPA can be up to 9-10% alcohol. And there's IBUs, which is an international bittering units, is how hoppiness is measured. And so the IPA you have now is 60 IBUs, which used to be considered extremely hoppy on the high end of the spectrum. But today, and because of the market has changed so much, now it's considered a pretty mellow IPA with people offering 100 IBUs.
When I was in England, they pump the beer at basement temperature. What prevents us doing things like that in America?
Well, back in the day before refrigeration, they would put big barrels down in the basement and pump it up to the bar with a cask engine. And so there are pubs around Seattle that offer cask conditioned ale, so it's kind of old school. A lot of the carbonation is blown off of it, and it's drawn manually rather than pumped with gas. And I think that's all the questions we have time for, but I'll be around at the break if you have some more.